You've probably seen these kinds of global data maps before, but whether they track worldwide GDP per capita, daily meat consumption, or CO2 emissions, there is one specific territory in northwestern Africa that always shows up gray. It simply says no data. That blank space is Western Sahara, a territory roughly the size of the United Kingdom, home to over 600,000 people. This absence of information is an intentional byproduct of the region's status. The UN classifies Western Sahara as a non-self-governing territory, marking it with a dashed border that hides the single largest active territorial dispute in Africa. Far from being an empty void, the actual ground here is divided by massive fortifications and live minefields, where opposing sides are currently locked in an escalating arms race. The persistent no data label effectively masks a high-stakes struggle for land and identity, keeping a major African conflict hidden from the global conversation. Gathering on-the-ground data is physically impossible because the territory is split in two by a 2,700-kilometer barrier known as the berm. It is a massive wall of sand and stone that carves directly through the open desert. The Moroccan military guards this structure with fixed radar systems, artillery positions, and drone bases. They also filled the surrounding sand with millions of explosive devices, creating the longest continuous minefield on Earth. To understand why this wall exists, we have to look back to 1975. Spain had controlled the region as a colony for nearly a century. When international pressure finally forced the Spanish to withdraw, the International Court of Justice ruled that the indigenous population, known as the Sahrawi, had the right to vote on their own independence. The Moroccan monarchy ignored that ruling entirely. Instead, the king called upon his citizens to physically occupy the land. Over 350,000 unarmed Moroccan civilians marched across the border, waving flags and carrying royal portraits to claim the territory by sheer demographic weight. That mass settlement triggered an immediate war. The indigenous Sahrawi formed a nationalist movement called the Polisario Front and launched an armed insurgency to fight for an independent state. The fighting raged for over a decade. To secure the valuable western portion of the territory, Morocco constructed the berm, physically walling off the remaining Sahrawi fighters in the barren eastern desert and locking the indigenous population out of their own homeland. By 1991, the UN managed to broker a ceasefire. In exchange for putting down their weapons, the Polisario Front was promised that the long-delayed democratic referendum on independence would finally take place. This chart shows the current demographic breakdown inside the territory. To influence any future vote, the Moroccan government offered tax breaks and civil service jobs to encourage mass migration. Today, Moroccan settlers outnumber the native Sahrawi 2-to-1 inside the occupied zone. Meanwhile, the math looks entirely different when you zoom out. More ethnic Sahrawi live outside Western Sahara than inside, with roughly 174,000 displaced people gathered across the border in Algeria. Generations of these refugees are stuck in a sprawling network of dirt brick homes and UN tents in the harsh Algerian desert, waiting for a vote that has been delayed for over 33 years. Morocco insists that all of its modern settlers must be allowed to participate in the referendum. The Polisario Front demands that only the original pre-1975 inhabitants and their descendants can vote. Because neither side will compromise on who gets a ballot, the political process is completely frozen. Maintaining a 2,700-kilometer militarized wall and absorbing decades of international diplomatic pressure requires immense resources. Morocco is willing to pay that cost because the territory holds exceptional economic value. Hidden behind the Moroccan fortifications are massive deposits of phosphate rock at the Boukra mine. Phosphates are a mandatory ingredient for modern synthetic fertilizers, making them essential to global agricultural output. Morocco already holds the world's largest proven reserves, and keeping Western Sahara secures their dominance. They extract around 3 million tons of the rock here every single year. To get it to market, they operate a 100-kilometer-long conveyor belt that continuously runs the white powder straight across the open desert to the Atlantic coast. The stakes have only grown in recent years. The territory's massive exclusive economic zone in the Atlantic is highly likely to contain rich offshore natural gas reserves. On top of that, Western Sahara sits directly in the path of a proposed $25 billion pipeline designed to connect West African energy supplies straight to Europe. Control over this territory secures a dominant position over global phosphate prices and provides a bottleneck over future trans-African energy corridors. Frustrated by decades of delays and accelerating resource extraction, Polisario fighters resumed their armed attacks on the berm in late 2020. The 29-year ceasefire officially collapsed, and active combat returned to the desert. Shortly after, the United States altered decades of established foreign policy. The U.S. formally recognized Morocco's complete sovereignty over Western Sahara. In exchange for this diplomatic backing, Morocco agreed to fully normalize its relations with Israel. This trilateral alignment immediately alarmed neighboring Algeria. Viewing the new alliance as a direct threat to their own national security, the Algerian government severed all diplomatic ties with Morocco and escalated their military and financial backing of the Polisario fighters. Both North African powers are now engaged in an escalating arms race. While Morocco buys American and Israeli systems, Algeria is loading up on Russian and Chinese hardware. Algeria has pushed its defense spending so high that it now maintains the second highest military budget in the world as a percentage of its GDP. That gray void on the map hides a volatile geopolitical battleground where superpower interests are quietly clashing, threatening the stability of the entire region.